Hey everyone, welcome to a new video. Today we're going to be talking about the three different types of SaaS. You have micro SaaS, you have medium and large scale SaaS. Those are the three types. I typically tend to recommend people to have their dreams, aspirations, and goals focused more on micro SaaS because of the lifestyle that it brings. As someone who has multiple SaaSes, various different streams of income, I try to give advice around basically living the good life, not really being too busy, not really working too hard. I know that kind of sounds crazy a little bit. Trust me, I'm not promoting some kind of get-rich-quick scheme, but you guys know how SaaS is. When you build a SaaS, when you build a product that effectively can run on its own, doesn't need too much updates, at least not consistently, you're pretty much living good as long as you understand the marketing side of things. Speaking of marketing, I'll leave a link in the description where you can get my book, where I teach effectively how to market your SaaS product properly using psychology and other different aspects. Once again, the link will be in the description. But today, like I said, let's talk about these three different kinds of SaaS. So what is micro SaaS? The definition, in my opinion, is a SaaS business generating from $0 to about $5,000 per month. That's typically where it kind of sits. So imagine you have 2 or 3 different SaaS products generating 5K, 4K, 3K. Those are not kind of products that you have to spend all day working on or answering customer support emails or attending to people's needs. And speaking of customer support, your product should, naturally have some, I guess you could say, a good flow to where users know how to understand and interact with the product. There's instructions inside the product, things like that. Typically, these kind of SaaS guys, they're operated by solo founders. In small teams, maybe, your friend, you can use that as a team. Maybe you hire a couple virtual assistants. But typically, these kind of businesses are small, these small type. These are focused on niche markets. Micro SaaS is really nice because if you can solve a niche problem, it's relatively easy to get customers. Versus if you're competing with a big dog, let's just use Canva for example. If you're creating a software that competes with Canva, well, you have all kinds of different niches to toggle, right? You can target people who are t-shirt designers. You can target people who are presentation creators. You can target people who are creating graphics for whatever reason. These are things, guys, that the larger the niche, the more the competition, the harder it is truly to get a customer. But the more niche it is, the more specific it is, the easier it is to get a customer. And when you create a highly targeted product, it's easier to build. There's less features, there's less work that's needed, and that's kind of why micro SaaS is great. Now, speaking of the lifestyle, which is to me the most important thing, being, I've been in a position where I've been extremely, extremely busy, and then there were other times where I didn't really have anything to do pretty much on a daily basis, especially after, going through certain processes, selling, a lot of the different traffic sources that I had that brought income to these different SaaS products, brought income to various other digital products. I kind of had both ends of the spectrum where, once again, I'm building and working like crazy, and then I had many, many hours of the day doing effectively nothing. So, lifestyle, minimal overhead. Obviously, you're going to get bored if you have nothing to do all day, but at least you have some sort of task or something to focus on a little bit a day. You guys know the book, The 4-Hour Workweek. When you get to a certain point, right, if lifestyle is your choice, you can truly have, maybe not a 4-hour work week, but a 10-hour work week, something like that. That's not crazy to say, especially in the SaaS world. Flexibility and freedom on your terms is what micro SaaS gives you. The struggles of micro SaaS are really limited to the resources or the size of the market. And the reason why I say that is because when you pick something niche, right, and this is why you probably have to have multiple different micro SaaSes, when you pick a niche, that niche is going to be ideally ultra specific so that you can get customers easily, but there is a give and take there. The smaller the niche, the more specific, yes, the easier it is to get customers, but at the same time, guys, it's harder to expand because where are you going to expand to? If you're going to get, let's just say, a fraction of the marketplace, let's say 0.1% of the entire marketplace is going to be your customer base. It's a very limited amount to take from if the niche is small, right? If there's like, let's just say 40,000 people in a specific niche, your customer base is going to be 0.1% or zero point 0.1 or, maybe even 1% if you're lucky enough. It's still a small niche. Now, honestly, if you get 1%, is more than enough, because imagine you have a $10 subscription, $10 times 4,000, that's 40,000 people. That's $40,000, excuse me. It's more than enough for a micro niche, but most people don't really get that far. That's why I say 0.1%. So if you do the math on that, right, that's 40 people times $10, it's $400 a month. So ideally you want to increase that a little bit, but you get the concept of where things go here. That's why scale is kind of the negative of having a micro SaaS. Now, what to expect when you're building a micro SaaS? Once again, this is the smaller size SaaS. Limited customer support. The answer is, in the SaaS world, when it comes down to customer support, most times you really won't need to hire anybody. I'm just going to keep it real. If you have good instruction in your product, you have good tutorials, good informational, good documentation, most people are not really going to necessarily need to message you and ask you for help or something like that. Really, the only type of customer support that should actually happen is when a customer really wants a refund or something like that. It shouldn't be anything tech related. Customers should already know how to use the product, already know what they're doing with really no issues. You could do that with video tutorial to help them out. You could do that with documentation. There's a lot that goes into that, but at the end of the day, when you're building this product, it should be seamless. And customer support obviously is something that people worry about. And honestly, developers really hate dealing with customers. That's part of the reason why they're developers, kind of hermits in a way. But nobody really wants to deal with that. So the less customer support, the better. But the smaller the business is, the less customer support you're going to deal with. And you could definitely manage it yourself. If you don't want to and you have a bunch of different SaaS products, you could hire a virtual assistant. You could even figure out a way to integrate your customer support with AI. So, there's different ways to make it happen. You're going to probably grow your customer base relatively slowly. It's not like you're going to shoot from 0 to 5K a month and then 5K to 40K and then 40K to 120K. It doesn't really work that way. In a micro SaaS, it's really on a customer by customer basis. That's really what it is, and how many users you have. And you're going to be able to count on a couple hands over time how many users you have. You might have 90, you might have 100, and we're talking about paid users. Nobody cares about free. Free doesn't matter because it doesn't pay your bills, so who really cares? That's the most important thing. Focus on finding a niche and catering to efficiently. When you're building your SaaS, and this is kind of advice that not only did I share in the workbook that I wrote, but also here is when you find that niche, you really need to figure out what they need, okay? And it has to be a better solution than what's currently out there. And that's kind of the way to get your customer base. That's as far as it goes. There are people looking for solutions on a daily basis, whether it be through a simple Google search, maybe through a YouTube video, whatever the case may be, they're looking for the solution. It's your job to provide them that solution, but more importantly, to show them that it truly is the solution that they need. Part of that is marketing. Part of that is informational marketing. Part of that, honestly, is entertainment as well. You look at somebody like, for example, and I hate to say this, but let's say Logan Paul. He doesn't sell SaaS, obviously, but he has a company, Prime Energy. I don't know what it's valued at, but $1 billion or something crazy like that? A company like that doesn't go far unless there's some sort of entertainment in the marketing. Let's use Mint Mobile, for example. I wouldn't necessarily call that a SaaS, but it is a service, and it is a subscription payment, right? Having that phone bill of Mint Mobile, $15 a month. Look at the entertainment in their ads, right? They're running these different ads. They're comedic. They're entertaining. There's a part to that, to play. And that's why marketing is relatively important to learn and understand over time. All right, guys. Now, the biggest challenge you're going to have is your marketing, is your sales. You're going to have to wear different hats. Not only you're going to be a developer, you're going to have to learn how to do the marketing. You're going to have to learn to do customer service. And honestly, you should be okay with that because that's the nature of it. You're going to do all the work up front, and that's how you generate income over time. So why not sell your micro SaaS? This is something that I'm pretty against for most people. I don't think most people should sell their micro SaaS. Because you have to think about this. In order for you to even build a micro SaaS that is successful, you need to have a customer base. How does a customer base exist? Traffic. How does traffic exist? Well, you have to own some sort of platform, right, that generates traffic for you and sends it to your SaaS. Whether it be a YouTube channel, a TikTok page, Facebook page, a blog, whatever the case may be. Now, me personally, I prefer articles and blogs along with video, but I mean, however you want to do it doesn't really matter. It could be Instagram, whatever. You're selling the asset along with it. What's the asset? The asset is the traffic generation. When you sell that asset, okay, you're effectively selling all of your hard work. The app that you have is not the amazing thing. It's not the golden goose. It's the traffic that you have. And so nobody's going to just buy your app without the traffic. That's not going to happen unless you have some fool buying your product, because the traffic is the most important thing. Traffic is the resource that matters. I could hire a guy from India to make an app for me. That's not going to help. I could have AI create an app for me. But traffic is not something you can just pay for. I mean, you can pay for ads and things like that, but loyal traffic that truly wants to buy your product, if it was that simple, then everybody would pay for it. But it's not. It has to be earned. And so your traffic is the most valuable asset you have, not your app. And so when you sell, nobody's going to just buy your app without the traffic. You're selling your traffic, and your traffic is going to result into the income. So that's why I don't recommend people to sell their app. Also, if imagine your product is making like $4,000 or $5,000 a month, you multiply the numbers out, okay? Relatively, let's just assume it's like 90% profit, because it should be, honestly. Your hosting fees are really the only thing that matters, server costs, things like that. But let's just say four grand times 12. What is that, 42K? 42K times 3, which is the rough scale of multiplication to when you get acquired, that's roughly how much it's going to be worth. You're looking at over 120 grand. Who on earth is going to pay 120 grand? Here's the thing. Now, think of it this way. There are people who might be willing to buy your app for 120K. But once again, the problem is you're selling your traffic. You can always pivot in the future. But more importantly, there's not many buyers in the acquisitional world that are willing to buy at that price. So what happens is, and this is unfortunate, and this is what I also seen, is that when you're selling your app, there is a market for very, very large buyers, people who are willing to easily spend over $5 million on an app. And these are not necessarily people, they're corporations, but you get the point. Then you have the small scale, which is somewhere in the range of, let's just say, 500,000 to $1 million for an app. However, right, for a SaaS, however, these guys have development teams, these guys have customer support teams, and they acquire a Rolodex over time of applications. What happens is, in this case, is that there's far few of these people or these corporations that exist than at the million plus scale, and or the 5 million plus scale, excuse me. And then finally, you have the small scale. The small scale people typically don't spend over like 36K on a SaaS. And what they do is they buy these small businesses and they build them up. Well, if you're in the case of, let's just say you're generating 4 or 5K a month, well, you're going to sell your app for more than 36K, obviously. And so you're putting yourself in a market space where you've already kind of grew the business to the point where a buyer who wants to scale the app he's outpriced. It's going to cost too much for him, so he's not buying it. And then the guy who's going to usually spend 500, 750K, a million for an app, he's not going to buy your app. It's too small for him. So you're sitting in a situation where you're locked in this purgatory, if you will. So it's not ideal to sell, not even just from the money standpoint, but really from the selling of your assets, which is the stable income that comes from the traffic. So now let's get into medium SaaS. So you're really exceeding 5K here. You could not really exceed 100 grand at this point, but you're making 50 grand, 60 grand, 35 grand, 100 grand, 80K. That's kind of the medium SaaS area. And this is a quite different place to be because you're not really micro niche anymore. You've got attention from a lot of different presses, right? You got HubSpot, you got Y Combinator, you got all these different platforms where a lot of different apps come out of these places generating in this field, the medium SaaS kind of field. They also get a lot of attention online. By the way, the attention truly does affect your lifestyle. A lot of people don't see it this way, and they think of just the money. But you have to realize that when you get this much attention, you have a target on your back. You're effectively much higher chance of getting hacked. Okay, you're a much larger target. You have much more liability. You have a lot more things to worry about. But more importantly, you have to do a lot more work. I mean, there's a ton more customer service. You're going to have to constantly worry about bugs and issues. Now, bugs and issues typically tend to become more pronounced as your SaaS grows. Now, this is 100% true because people try things, they test things, they break things. Now, of course, you're supposed to have a perfect product before you're truly releasing, but the reality is that the app is not going to be 100% perfect before releasing. Everybody knows that. Nobody creates an app that's perfect all the time before release. You know, it really takes some work, especially if you're a one-man team. And speaking of being a one-man team, at this point, it's much harder because you're going to have to up the ante on the marketing. And that costs money. Content creation, if you're not going to pay for it, you're going to do it yourself. You know, blog creation, video creation. You're really going to have to do more outreach. You're going to have to find more influencers. A lot more work to do. As far as building, we kind of already talked about this, but the marketing, you're going to have to probably pay, for paid ads. Inbound marketing, you're going to have to do some kind of partnerships, maybe find some influencers online. Once again, we already talked about that, but you're essentially building a brand at a much bigger stage. It's a lot more work, you know. For every one action that you do building a micro SaaS, you're going to have to multiply this by about 10 to 20 times to get a medium scale size. And honestly, medium scale size are extremely hard to do as a solopreneur. Really, really hard to do. I mean, you have to be some sort of savant to really make it happen. And we're talking about in excess of $50K a month. I mean, it's going to be very difficult. You might see some videos online of people saying, oh, I make $40K, $30K a month online through a single SaaS product. It is difficult, guys. It's very, very difficult. And honestly, it doesn't seem realistic for a singular person to be able to jump in. When you're selling your medium-sized SaaS, you're getting to the point, once again, where the acquisition, you're going to have to compromise some things. So when people are buying your SaaS, once again, about 50% of the time, at this point, they're going to need financing. Most people, and once again, it depends on the size. If your size is like 80K, you're probably going to have a different customer base than if your size is making 20K a month or 18K a month, right? But medium-sized SaaS it has maybe very specific issues as to why it's not super scaling, okay? Because at that point, you have all the infrastructure. You have the team, you have the people. At least you should have the people, the team. But might be certain issues, meaning a presentation issue. You're presenting your app in a wrong light, or you're not mentioning the needs properly that the customer needs to see. You know, they need to see why they need the product. Kevin O'Leary said this. He said one day he walks into Apple. He was going to perform a presentation because he wanted to sell his learning company to Apple so that they can, or his learning company software to Apple so that it can be installed in the Apple computers, and he can effectively generate a royalty off each Apple computer sold. And he says he was listening to a presentation prior to him making his own presentation to Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs was basically talking about this new feature that was going to go in the Apple computer. And there was a young steward in the room, and he said, how do we know that our customers are going to want this? We have to do market research. And Steve Jobs stares at the guy and pauses, and he says, no, we don't listen to what customers need. We tell them what they need. And that kind of idea just kind of rings true. If you're in a SaaS world, you know at a certain marketing perspective, and if you don't know, then you need my workbook to kind of help you out there, which there's nothing wrong with, but I'm just saying, you know that there is an aspect of psychological manipulation. You are telling customers You need this. And this is going to change your life, and you're going to list out the benefits and features, whatever. But that's not the point. The point is that you're not necessarily serving a customer base to where they need something and you're giving it to them. You're doing literally a PSYOP, explaining to customers how this will change their life, and then they believe you from that standpoint, and they think it's better, and they purchase. Now, the way that works psychologically is a different universe than a guy who's doing micro SaaS. A guy who's doing micro SaaS is directly serving a need. Like, I need a better mousetrap, and they search for it, and then boom, that's micro SaaS. But medium, large-scale SaaS, they operate in the same psychological world. If you don't have if you haven't scaled from like 18K, 16K, 12K to 94K, 86K, 78K, if you're not at that range, then you probably have some of those issues from the psychological standpoints. It's not necessarily about reaching out. People probably already know about your SaaS. They probably know about your service, but they're not pulling the trigger, right? So selling it is, selling the SaaS business. Once again, you're in this stage of like kind of purgatory, because if you're a smaller size SaaS, the small guys who are looking for a business to scale up, they're not going to be purchasing your app. It costs too much for them. But if you're, kind of, once again, in that small size, and you go to the big guys and try to get purchased there, it's too small. You have no real weight for what they're looking for. And so you have to realize that if an app, is generating, let's just say 80, 90K, depending on the assets that the app comes with, it could potentially sell for over $3 million. So, it's you're sitting in a gap there. There's a gap space, so it's harder to find customers. But let's kind of talk about large scale. Large scale is where you're making over 100K a month. These are large companies, really large companies, but they differ. I mean, you have a company like Canva that's making hundreds of millions, and then you have a company like, I don't even know, maybe ConvertKit in its infancy stage, where it might be generating 155K a month, and there is a significant difference between the two. But at that point, it's just a matter of quantity. It's a matter of doing more and more and more, from finding more, customers, to writing more content, to creating more video content, to hiring more influencers. It's just a matter of doing more. It's going to take deeper pockets, for sure. You're going to need legal teams. You're going to need engineering teams. You're going to need many employees here. Easily, you scale a team over 20 people. Easily. And you're going to need to hire specific people for customer support if that's not already obvious. But your lifestyle as a CEO or somebody who owns the app, you're not going to really have that much free time. I'm just going to keep it real. You're always going to be focusing on features, new things to build, ways to improve the app, because you're in a position now where you're competing with the big dogs. And either you're going to get acquired to be stuffed, to be buried, right? To be essentially killed, because companies do that. They'll acquire a business just so that they don't have to worry about them as competition for the future, or they'll acquire them and kind of implement them in their Rolodex. Now, we talked about that, but your lifestyle is going to be high stress. You're going to be doing a lot of work. You have a lot of responsibility. You're checking in with multiple teams every day, and every day you're turning off huge, tremendous fires. It could be lawsuits. It could be legal issues. It could be reputational issues. All you need is somebody to come, an influencer, with a few subscribers, and sometimes these type of videos kind of explode, but make a negative review of your content, of your product. That's all it takes. And that could wipe out 5, 10, 20K MRR a month, depending on the size of that video, or the size of that complaint, or the size of that review, how many people it reaches. So these things are quite important. And you're going to have to realize that if you're willing to kind of negotiate and say, okay, I'm willing to not have a lifestyle whatsoever, but I want to have a high scale, a large scale SaaS, then it's worth it to me. Everybody's different, right? What to expect? Okay, so you're going to have strategy in your vision as to what features you're going to implement for your future, what new things you're going to create. You're going to have foresight in comparing your SaaS to future SaaSes that come out and decide to compete. You have to realize that companies see you as competition, and they're going to leverage your weaknesses for their abilities to grow. You will likely need to expand internationally. I mean, that's pretty much obvious. Niches are hard to expand in if you're just stuck with one language, one language region. But this also becomes infinitely harder because now you're fighting an uphill battle. Customers in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, depending on your SaaS, because every SaaS is a little bit different, they're more inclined to spending money than customers outside of the United States and other westernized countries. I mean, it's just the truth. If you compare SaaS customer volume from United States versus India, for example, India is at a much lower rate. Not, number one, because there's a lot of developers in India, but more importantly, people spend less money there. I mean, that's just a pure fact. GDP is real. If you compare, for example, Germany to Romania, there's a lot more customers in Germany than there is in Romania because they have more money. I mean, just a simple fact. So it's not necessarily easy to scale internationally. A lot of people don't realize how difficult that is. And it takes, once again, more psyop, more psychological manipulation, psychological operations on a consumer to make them part with their money. Now, it depends on the service of that business. Usually, B2B is the easiest to kind of get money out of a customer because it's a lot harder to rationalize paying for something for yourself than versus a business, because businesses look at it, okay, we're making an investment here, we're going to make money out of this. But in that case, that's something to be aware of. And, as far as my final thoughts on large-scale SaaS is extremely difficult. Most people who even are considering to get into the SaaS world are never going to make it there anyway. I'm just keeping it real. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but it's the utter truth. So I really wouldn't consider myself worried about large-scale SaaS. I would say if you really, really want to grow as fast as you can and as large as you can, make sure you have no bugs, no issues, no errors, and try to expand. Try to create platforms that you own for marketing, a blog, a YouTube channel, a TikTok channel, and then from there, kind of expand into creating teams of affiliates and influencers that could potentially promote your product. For me, it's become abundantly clear. I'm done with the hard work lifestyle. I'm past that. I've been in the business world for probably over 9 years now, and I'm not going to concern myself with generating 50, 100K in revenue or profit, whatever you want to call it, per month off of a SaaS. That's not my concern. I'm good with doing micro SaaS, generating income here and there from all kinds of different apps, and having diversity in my approach, and not having to worry all night about working on an app, implementing new infrastructure, customer support. I do like the solopreneur lifestyle a lot more than my past, where I was kind of creating, in a way, a corporation. Solopreneur kind of ideology is more for me. That's kind of why I sold a lot of the different traffic sources that I had that was creating me income sources. But more downsizing is kind of my focus. So it just depends on you. It depends on what you want. If you're a little bit on the younger side, and you have all that energy to go to 150K a month, 100K a month, 50K a month, you want to get there, then it's just a matter of you doing the work. I mean, there's really no magic to it. It is difficult. It is time-consuming, but it is worth it at some point or another. Obviously, you only have a few good years to really, really push as hard as you can in a certain industry and reach the top. After that, it should be really all coasting. I mean, most people in the world of, let's just say, software, there's only a few years where they work extremely, extremely hard. After that, their software might grow, but they're hiring CMOs, CEOs, C-suite executives, exactly. And they're getting further that way as opposed to them running the entire thing because they prioritize lifestyle. There's family that gets involved, other real-life aspects to life other than just sitting behind a computer and working. So hopefully this video helps out and kind of gives you perspective on where you want to go in the future. But yeah, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for watching, and peace out. Bye.